work with ThoughtWorks. My name is Amit. I am a project manager with ThoughtWorks. So you'll find I'll bring a little bit more of a process-oriented mindset. Technical stuff I get, but not really the expert like some of my other folks. A lot of international experience. Off late, I've ended up finding myself working with our larger companies who ask us to come in and take a look. And big companies have been around for a while, tend to have big legacy, and I've kind of found myself finding being in that sort of a pattern.
So the purpose of today's talk is to simply take you on a journey of how we've applied Agile to legacy systems, and to share with you some of the things that have worked and some of the things that haven't, despite our best efforts. But before we begin, I'd like to ask a quick question. How many of you are planning a legacy augmentation replacement effort now? How many of you are in the middle of one as we speak? For those, how many think it's going well?
The question was, how many? For those of you who are in the middle of one right now, how many of you feel that it's going well?
And we know that feeling.
All right, so for the room, and feel free to shout out your responses. What comes to mind when you think about the word legacy as it's applied to technology? What are the things that come to your mind? Just go ahead and shout them out.
You don't know what it's supposed to.
Don't know what it's supposed to do. Mainframe. This side of the room.
Lack of documentation.
Lack of documentation.
Inflexible
Probably just
Inflexible.
Probably just something not necessarily from a technology perspective, but just from a deployment perspective. Just something that is being done, and then that something has to be, either you need to extend the feature or you need to maintain it. Right?
Sure. So there's maintenance and deployment challenges. Yep. Some roadblocks there. Anything else?
It's probably deeply rooted in the systems and the organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Deeply rooted.
One of the big things I find is that the way people do things has been heavily influenced by the tools that they use, even if it's not the best.
Influence coming from tools as opposed to business, perhaps? Would that be a characterization? Right. What else?
It works, but no one dare touching it.
No one wants to touch it. Oh, that's a big one. That is indeed a big one.
So we've done this poll a couple of times before, and you know, we're not surprised to hear some of those phrases used. Talking about some of the ones that we've seen in previous polls. Expensive to maintain, green screen. Someone mentioned mainframe earlier. Untested, so your legacy system is not really tested. It's complicated, it's database driven, fuzzy. So these are all the phrases that have come out. But there are different kinds of phrases that are also associated with legacy systems. And these are important to remember, that they work, that they are business critical, they are a system of record, so most of your valuable data could be stored on there, and that they are familiar. They're familiar to your users, your business stakeholders, and your IT departments.
So a couple of notes here to establish a little bit of context about what we're going to take on as base assumptions going forward for today's presentation. As Michelle said, we want to walk into the definition of legacy, keeping in mind that there is inherent value in what your systems currently have. They make you money. And we don't want to walk into this presentation saying legacy must go, must be replaced. And on that note, you're going to hear us use the word legacy transformation interchangeably with transformation, augmentation, replacement, remediation. We're going to use those words interchangeably because transformation could mean different things to different organizations. And for your organization, replacement might be a better strategy as opposed to changing or refactoring into place. And we'll go over a few patterns and thought processes on how best to make those decisions and determinations. So in all the work that we've been doing in various organizations in terms of their legacy platforms and the uniquenesses that they bring to the table, given their businesses and their technologies, we started going down into a back to basics approach. Agile's been around 10 years, and there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of there, and there's a lot of complexity that's been built over time, and we wanted to distill and break that down and take a look at first principles. And one of the first things we wanted to do was ask the question why. Why do organizations undertake legacy transformations? Right? Might be obvious, but we want to actually investigate and explore that a bit. And in all our analysis, we ended up coming to this big bad beast. Not surprising. I mean, all our analysis paths kind of ended up with money. And we broke down, we dug a little bit deeper and came down to a simple equation. This might be an oversimplification, but what is the current true cost of my technology asset? And what is the current true value of my technology asset? And if my cost is greater than the value, I need to do something about it. Or if my costs are rising, the value is decreasing, I know something's going to happen, I need to do something about it. Very simple, elementary mathematical equation. So in digging deeper into the cost side of that equation, we came across a little gem. And somebody brought this up earlier when we were polling you guys. The true cost of systems. The numbers are, forget about the individual numbers, the 10 and 90%, but there's an overwhelming majority of cost that goes into a system after it's been deployed. Right? By some estimates, 10% of the true cost of a system is in the build phase, the delivery and construction phase. And 90%, in some cases over 90%, actually gets spent after that point, keeping that system live and running. Now, how many of you were surprised by this number? And that makes sense, because most people inherently know that this is where money needs to be spent. However, we often find, when we go into our engagements, that the project-based mindset tends to stay with the 10%, because the intention is to execute and deliver without keeping that much of an eye on maintainability, as was mentioned earlier today. So we wanted to make sure that we take maintainability, if that's even a word, into account when we look at what an effective strategy would be for successful, or to increase the likelihood of success of the legacy system transformation. And that led us down to this key word, degradation. And it's one of the words I'd like for you to keep in mind as we go through today's presentation. It's something that we're going to circle back to a little bit later, where Agile should be able to supply us, or Agile thinking and philosophies and mentality should be able to give us ways and means of managing the rate of degradation of your technology asset. Now, I'm defining degradation in two very broad ways, quality and support. Degradation of quality encompasses can't build, can't change, user frustration, no tests, dated interfaces. I'm going to lump all that into quality. And I'm going to define support as things as broad as can't find business champions, can't find new people, no more vendor support, no market support. So I'm going to keep that categorization in mind. Ultimately, degradation is a root challenge, and we want to ensure that focus remains on there going forward.
So, in fitting with the theme of this conference, which is Hunting Agile Elephants, we thought we'd actually go through some of the elephants that we've encountered in the past while undertaking legacy system transformations. So the first one, I've been doing business for 30 years with this system. It makes me money. Agile doesn't give me enough visibility to know how my bottom line will be impacted during the transformation. Fair enough. Another elephant we see often. I've seen Agile principles work really well with new greenfield projects constructed from the ground up. However, I've had trouble fitting these practices with entrenched platforms and people. And my favorite elephant that haunts me the most is my users are used to the way the system works right now. There is no way I can release incrementally. We have to replace the whole legacy platform all at once. Now, we don't know all the answers to address these Agile elements. We've just come across them. Sometimes we failed in the face of these elephants, and sometimes we find ways to work around them. So what we hope that during the course of this talk, we can share with you some of our experiences with addressing some of the Agile elements successfully, and some of them, well, we don't have the answers yet.
in digging deeper and deeper, we wanted to make sure we covered some of the other human aspects as well that we find in the behavioral patterns that we found in our various engagements. I know what I know, it's what I know, and it's all I want to know. And we've encountered this a lot. And people, this is natural, people become accustomed. Legacy system is something that they're familiar with. It's in some cases 25 years, and it's their careers, and that's natural, that's normal. It speaks a little bit, if I may, going to Linda's Agile Mindsets presentation earlier this morning. There's a little bit of that, and that's to be understood and accounted for when going forward with a strategy for successful transformation. One of the other things we've also noticed is that the legacy platform ends up becoming such a comfortable benchmark that everything you do, every effort in transforming and bringing in a new system or changing your system in place, the success gets measured against the legacy platform. Everything gets measured against that. And that's something we've observed very, very frequently. And when the going gets rough, the easy fallback is to recourse and go back to the status quo. It's the simplest trade-off that can be made. And that's something that we found often enough that we want to make sure we keep in mind as we go forward with what are the simple things we can do to circumvent that and go around that. Keep in mind, we've seen this happen even in the most agile of environments. It ain't broke, so why monkey with it? This came up earlier today as well. Some of us call that caution. I like to apply a different word to this pattern, fear. Action only being taken when the technology asset has likely decayed irredeemably. And that's something to watch for as well. Ultimately, this is a key contributing factor to expensive and rushed legacy transformation efforts. And this is often a very, very core contributor to historic frustrations around legacy transformation efforts. Silver bullet mentality. I think there was another presentation at the conference around silver bullets, I believe it was yesterday. This is something we see as well. You're running .NET 2.0 or RPG or COBOL, mainframe. There are people and there are well-intended tools out there to say, take your mainframe application, install our software, and you'll get this vibrant front-end web-based experience in no time. Your business logic can be ported to the web, no problem. It's very tempting. But as we all know, business complexity and technical complexities and the inherent lack of separations that exist in a lot of legacy systems make that really, really difficult. But it's a behavioral aspect that we've also noticed where there might be a perception that it's actually not that hard to do when in fact it really is. And finally, well, I just spent a whole bunch of time and money to launch this product, right? I don't want to touch it again for a while. I'm done. I just delivered this project. I really don't want to look at this for the next couple of years. Spend cost mentality. It's another thing to watch for. It's normal, it's natural, but as we talked about before in terms of degradation, it's just a matter of time before that software asset starts to degrade and you have to spend a lot more money and a lot more time and probably do a poorer job because you're rushing through it to make that system healthier for you again.
So Amit just spoke about some of the behavioral patterns out there. Well, I'd like to talk about some of the execution scenarios that I've seen and actually been involved in. So let's start with our legacy platform. I wish I worked with systems that fit into little boxes like that, but for the sake of this presentation, let's say it does. So we have your core business logic, we have your data store, and if you're using a file store, let's say you're capturing that as well. Now, when people say legacy, you think COBOL RPG, but keep in mind that we've done legacy transformations for projects written on .NET 2.0 platforms as well, so it can be fairly decent. As Martin Fowler says, whenever you put anything into production, it becomes legacy at that point. So this is the kind of effort we put in to achieve a legacy transformation. We did a like for like. Don't get me wrong, this was delivered in an agile fashion. We did 2-week iterations, delivering features from the old system into the new system. We used a shinier, newer, faster version and delivered that to the business. But if you take a look at it, it doesn't really look very different from the old legacy platform. So that's why we call it a like for like. It still retains the same behavior of the legacy platform. Now, there are steps we took to modularize the code, make it more well-structured, build tests, and all those good things. So that part was successful. But there are some pitfalls that can happen with this sort of like-for-like replacement. Here's a classic. Oh, we didn't know about that one. And this tends to happen once you go live. Your legacy platform, it's taken years to build it, sometimes 25 years. Turning it off is never clean and easy. The focus is so much on reproducing the existing functionality that sooner or later you're bound to miss something. No matter how good our analysts were, our developers, our quality analysts, and we all have the best intentions, but at some point we missed or misunderstood something. Here's another classic. Well, we stopped using that code years ago. And this is what happens over legacy, the lifetime of the legacy system. There's so many pieces of logic and so much functionality that gets left out and is unused. When you do a like for like, you end up porting that over as well. So now we've spent money on bringing over code that, well, we didn't have to probably in the first place. Bugs. That's one of the other things we bring over from legacy systems when we do a like for like. So all legacy platforms have bugs, and users are very good at getting around those bugs, and now those bugs become expected behavior over time. So that's what you get in the new legacy platform as well. We've now replicated the bugs in our shiny new platform and spent money on it as well. So it's an unavoidable factor that flaws and bugs do get carried over and sometimes get misinterpreted as an expected feature.
So we've walked through some of the whys and a few things that we've seen that people have done and we've also been guilty of doing. And it got us thinking as to, there's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to be a better way to make this a lot more successful. And people have put a lot of information out there, bits and pieces. We want to kind of tie those together and, like I said before, go into a back to basics approach and strip away all the fluff. While I was on an engagement recently, I heard this quote from a CTO I was working very closely with, and he said, I want this new system that you're building for me. I spent a lot of money on it. It's my business, but my customers want me to adapt. And he goes, I want this new system to be car and a motorcycle. And he meant it to be a pressure tactic or just to be funny and anecdotal. But it got me thinking a little bit about the levels of pressure that our software is supposed to adapt to these days. And this is perfectly normal and natural. So this statement really prompted us to get into some of the analysis that we're bringing to you today. And we wrote down these 3 words that kind of form the cornerstone of what we're trying to say today. Degradation, we talked a little bit about it before. Separation seemed to come to mind come to float to the top as a word that was really critical to keep our eye on. And thin slicing. Independently, each of these have been talked about at great length. And we want to kind of find things that tie these together so we can package that and actually implement it very simply for organizations looking to go over some difficult changes. We'll be touching upon these in greater detail as we go forward, along with a couple of case studies. Degradation we talked about. Separation. When I say the word separation, I don't mean just technical separation where you keep your different technical stacks well decoupled from each other. I'm also talking about business separation. Making sure that what you're doing in your business doesn't all necessarily have to come from one place or from one group of people, but is adequately distributed among your organization. One of the fundamental bases of a learning organization is having that adequate separation and making sure that each group is talking to each other in a well-defined way. And thin slicing is something I'm going to go into a little bit deeper right now, where after encountering a lot of the like-for-like scenarios that Michelle talked about, we started to look into what are the planning and process tools that happen to be out there that introduce the required rigor and analytical discipline that is frequently underdone on legacy transformation projects. Yes, I did say planning, and even though this is an Agile conference, I want to dispel the myth that they don't go together. There's intense planning and tools that are available for us to be able to make these more successful. And we applied this particular technique on a couple of recent engagements. It's been around for a while. You probably already might have heard of it, but for those who don't, I'll go into a little bit of a deep dive. It's known by different names in practice, but it effectively involves being armed with a very broad picture like this. And if you look at the boxes here, the white boxes, I've picked just 5 at random. I've picked 5 functional areas. These are not features that your software needs to provide. These are areas that every software engagement or legacy engagement in particular needs to pay attention to. I just picked 5. Data, performance, API, user experience, integration. Very big buckets, very broad. The green bars here indicate potential delivery slices. And the intention is to deliver them incrementally. Start with the thinnest, simplest set of functional requirements that you will need and put that into production right away. It doesn't have to deliver any features to your users. We're talking really thin. The idea being you want to flush out and put into production and make sure you exercise your release processes. Make sure you exercise the discipline that it takes to go live into production. Not in a high ceremony once every 3 to 6 to 9 months. We're talking a matter of weeks. Your iterations don't have, these green bars here, they could be iterations, they could be releases. And we've actually seen this work really well in production because of the introduction of the discipline that thin slicing introduces. Now, this is the part that tends to get the greatest tension from business stakeholders, greatest pressures as well. Well, you're going to go live. I want all of this stuff put into production because my customers are asking for it right now. Well, what we're looking for is not necessarily feature release delivery. We're looking for a cadence of delivery. That way, when the time comes for us to put your features into production, we don't have to make it a big deal. We can do it for you really quick. What's more important also to keep in mind is the introduction of these thin slices flushes out, as I said before, your release automation, DevOps, testability across each of these. You're now looking at test suites that are a lot thinner, a lot flatter. Also, as you go forward, your legacy replacement, which originally, if you wanted to go like for like, would have taken several months, you can now afford course corrections where you've got feedback from the first, second, or third releases, and you can now incorporate that release feedback iteratively into what's going to go into subsequent slices. So we're not asking you to plan all of it, we're asking you to plan just enough. But the discipline for planning what goes into each of these green bars is the critical key. So keeping thin slicing in mind and the discipline that it brings to make sure that you go live more frequently, and like I said before, it doesn't have to be months, we're looking at weeks, and we'll talk about some case studies. We said, okay, that's well and good from a planning perspective, but we want to get something that actually makes sense to product owners, stakeholders, and executives from an execution standpoint. So we know what the plan's going to look like in the short term. We have an elephant that we know we want to address, which is, I want to see the whole thing. I want to get to, how's this going to affect my bottom line beyond the next couple of slices? So this is, the Strangler approach has been around for a while as well, and it's been overcomplicated over time. And we want to roll back some of what had been built on top of it and go into what it actually fundamentally could do in conjunction with thin slicing. For those of you who may or may not be familiar with the Strangler approach, the origins come from, I'm not sure if this picture is particularly clear, but there's a tree, and the Strangler vine, it's a very interesting phenomenon where the vine seeds start from the ground, and the vine quickly wraps itself around and grows around the host tree all the way to the top. And in the beginning, in the early stages, that vine depends on the tree for its structure, for its nourishment, for all of it that it needs to survive. In time, the interesting thing that happens is that core tree starts to die out as the vine gets stronger and stronger. And ultimately that vine strangles away the tree, leaving the tree just as an empty shell where it ultimately goes away. And that's the analogy that's going to be used for the Strangler approach that Michelle's going to talk about now, and as it applies to legacy platforms.
So I know the approach sounds a little morbid, but I promise you when we apply it to technology, it's not that bad. So how do we execute on the Strangler approach? So here's our good old legacy system. You start off by writing a new application that replaces some of the business value in the old system. It can be the tiniest slice that you can think of. But the important thing is to get started. Now we could go into a completely different topic about how to pick your first application. But again, for simplicity and for the sake of this presentation, let's say it's the thinnest possible slice that you can think of. So start by writing a new application that liberates some of the behavior in that old system. And then we tie that new behavior back into the old system. And the old system can still remain the system of record at this point. This is an important step. You need to put an interface in place to the legacy system that becomes the new integration point in that new system. Skipping this step, we've done it a couple of times and it doesn't really go well. So I'll stress the importance of that in a later slide. But you put an interface in place. And in this manner, we keep liberating behavior from the old system until one day you've done enough. So at this point, we say that the legacy application has been strangled. Now, you can move to a new data source if you choose to. There may be compelling reasons to do that. Like you have expensive support and maintenance costs if you have a third-party package. But whether or not you choose to move to a new data source, it is the interface that allows you to migrate your data and project over. And that can happen in a cleaner and cheaper fashion. At this point, the database replacement merely becomes an exercise in data migration. And thanks to the clean interfaces and the separations that you've introduced, you needn't move your logic over at this time. You could if you wanted to do that in the future. Now, I did mention that you stop when you've done enough. And in most cases, enough is not everything. And more often than not, enough is less than everything. The important thing to remember is don't change the legacy application. The green dots on the side that you see are multiple slices that you've released into production. They're separated based cleanly on technical and business lines. And each of these dots now, and in our example, so we replaced it with a Rails application, are easily transformable should degradation become factored. So keep that in mind that degradation can now be addressed at an individual application level rather than a whole system-wide level. So you got a problem with one of those green dots, well, you can pull it out. You don't have to monkey with a tightly coupled large-scale system at this point. Eventually, the interface can become mature enough where you can integrate external applications that were integrating into your old legacy platform now into your new system. We can port over some logic at this time that can be rewritten at a later time if you so choose. Spend money on the things you need on your technology stack and the most important business value features going forward. Spend money on tests. These are very important. And the important thing to remember also is now you're leaving the unused parts of the system behind. Here's a couple of techniques we use that I call.
You go back.
Over here.
So yeah, this application looks very similar to evolutionary prototyping.
Okay.
Right? The question is that not all legacy systems are about data. There might be some functionality, some sort of like
experience, we've actually had a lot of stored procedures in the database that we actually moved into logic. But we can extend those green lines into the logic as well, provide new applications that will take business calculations as well as data. So the safety net that I was talking about is the ability, well, actually, let's just go into it. These are techniques that we've used in the past. We start off with your good old legacy system, and then you wrap some tests around it. Test keep is safe. Now, this approach may be met with some reluctance. It may be considered low-value work to invest in, like, in tests from your legacy platform. But it is important to understand the behavior and the expected outcome of your legacy platform. And what this helps you with is that now you can put over those tests and validate the behaviors of your new system that you're replacing the behavior of the old system. So this gives product owners and stakeholders some comfort that the new system is behaving as expected, while giving technologists the security of building high-quality software. We've used this approach in the past on an AS400 system. So when we first went in there, we actually found out how to write behavior-driven tests for an AS400 system. And it was actually worth investing time and money in for a few weeks, because that really helped us port over when we replaced part of that system with a web application.
So let's look a little bit at how some of these techniques and this gross oversimplification of the approaches, but combining these various ingredients together could actually be applied to some real scenarios that we very recently were involved with. I was very involved with this particular company. One of the world's largest e-commerce companies, Fortune 500 company, top 1,000 in global web traffic, and ranks very high usually on the list of global sales, global online sales. Typical e-commerce stack, e-commerce storefront, orders go into a little fulfillment engine, and then ultimately those orders need to be processed, and inventory and warehouse numbers have to be managed. Pretty oversimplified, but pretty standard e-commerce stack. The original directive was to undertake full-fledged replacement of each of these big pieces. The Java application had been around 9 years, and so we started to see some of the problems in terms of growth. They had some purchase systems that couldn't quite keep up with their pace of growth, and pretty standard legacy replacement challenges, going back to the cost and value equation. So I want to focus this particular case study merely on one particular aspect inside the e-commerce storefront, which was around the catalog, and specifically around imagery, because in the retail business, all you got is the picture. You can't really feel the material, so the picture has to tell more than 1,000 words. So that was a directive that we were under. So you see a dude here with an orange sweater. I think it looks orange. Trust me, it's orange. I don't know if it looks red to you guys. But we found a couple of things that were pretty telling. Firstly, business wanted to make those images a lot cooler. They wanted to have different colors. They wanted the same dude, same pose, in a green sweater, and a red sweater, and a maroon sweater. So they wanted to give a full color swatch. And also wanted to be able to go into those images with very, very high resolution zoom, so that the user and the buyer can actually go ahead and take a look at that material in a better way than just a picture that looked like that. Their system couldn't do it, and it was thought that the path of progress would be to gut and change the entire catalog system. And as you can see, between where the catalog web logic was and where the actual catalog information was, where the images were, was a really convoluted detail path. So we went about this and went through a very contentious thin slicing exercise where business was like, no, I don't really care. I want this now. I just want this to work. I don't care if you have to rewrite this whole thing. I'll pay for it. It doesn't matter. We need this feature to be out for our users. That was going to take a lot of time and wasn't going to offer this value that they were looking for and the flexibility very, very quickly. So we went about thin slicing and just saying, and went down a path of slice one, we were going to go to production with nothing more than moving the images, the actual links to the images, off to a different system. It wasn't going to do anything at all but just reroute hyperlinks to go through this system as opposed to going through the insides. And we teased out, we strangled out just a little bit of complexity into this system. It didn't do anything different for the end users. But they were able to go live with this in 2 weeks. And the big win out of Slice 1 was, how can I automate my release process? How can I ensure that I've got a good functional set of tests for just that bit of work and nothing more? The level of attention and the blinders that came on were really useful so that the problem became less about this big bad behemoth and more about the little things that we were trying to do. 2 weeks, that's all it took. Go to production. We ended up having so much trouble going to production, but it was well worth it because we were going and having these troubles in production with a very small bit of impact as opposed to a big bang trying to get this into production with all these features that people are waiting for. That helped us a lot. And we went ahead and created some additional logic and a few rendering performance attributes, because obviously there was a bit of a performance issue with moving, rerouting the way our images were going to be rendered and going to be delivered. So we wanted to make sure we took care of those, and also a little bit of logic in there to prepare us for what was happening next. Once again, the key is, inherently, nothing was really changing in the system. We were just setting ourselves up. What we did find when we released Slice 2 was a far smoother release to production. It became no big deal. And that was really important. Everything was automated. We were firing up machines for testing and performance testing, no problem. Everything automated. Vagrant, Puppet, great tools. I think there was a DevOps presentation where it probably is going on right now, but if you're interested in how we were doing some of those mechanical things, I'd be happy to talk to you about that after the presentation. But Slice 2, nothing fancy, strangled just a little bit more from the inside, routed outside. Slice 3, nothing more than creating a separate data store for the images. Slice 2, images are coming from the original data source. Let's tease those out. That's all we're going to do in Slice 3. 2 weeks, images came out. That's all. And we had some challenges with our content data network, so because this is a global website, we want to make sure that these images somehow made their way for content distribution, for localized caching and things like that. So we worked with the vendor there a little bit for this Slice, but ultimately it was effectively a very simple transformation. Slice 4, as Michelle mentioned before, clean, crisp interfaces. So what was important now is by introducing these interfaces, we were now talking to our old system to do other things, because our catalog logic still resided there. We're only looking at images right now. And interface to our new data so that we could use this new data store for things that were going to come in the future. And finally, Slice 5 added a bit more logic, used the existing interfaces, and now we were able to build out, that little orange bit there is the logic that allowed us to be able to deliver various images with various swatching patterns and high resolution zoom. 10 weeks total, didn't have to replace the entire platform. There's a little bit of management involved, yes, but the platform stays the same so it can continue to be throttled and strangled out, move over to a brand new little system whose dedicated purpose is to deliver this feature. Clean interfaces that if we ever wanted to do more with this system, we're not going to the data, we're not going to the logic, we're going to the interface. So this is an example of how an actual thin slicing effort worked in a real implementation. Super successful.
So my example is from a telecommunications giant that we're with in Australia. This is not a classic example of the Strangler approach, but it does show you how we tackled a legacy system transformation that they were going to undertake at the time. So this is the as-is scenario. It had an online movie store, and it was connected to a video management platform, which was a vendor product. That product was about 5-6 years old. It was used to tag content as well as encode the content. After a few years, the company decided to release their own TV device that talked to the old video management platform as well platform as well as the billing system. And it wasn't a very pleasant experience, but they were glad it was over. Well, after the success of the first TV device, the company decided that they wanted to roll out a new TV device almost every 6 months or a year. So they were actually flying to South Korea, to Hong Kong, to make contracts and negotiate contracts for new TVs. IT went into a panic. They didn't know how they were going to do this again. So they kicked off a project and suggested this. And it looks great. They've suggested a uniform API interface that all future devices would talk to. And that would sit in between the video management platform and billing system. So once that is built, any device, bring it on, will release some RESTful endpoints, and these new devices should be able to talk to them. We went to the business with this proposal. Well, business didn't understand why they had to spend so much money and wait for a year before they could release the new TV device when their core business problems were not being addressed. So on hearing that, we did a current process mapping. And that helped the business articulate the challenges that they were having. And apparently, the major challenge was in the video management platform. It was really hard for them to tag content. Even if they released the new TV devices, there was no way of managing the new types of content and encoding that they wanted to offer, and that they were legally obligated to offer by the studios. And so what we did at that point was take a step back and see how to rework the problem. But I wanted to highlight this because this is a classic example of when projects get started by IT departments. So the work tends to get prioritized from a very technical perspective, which often results in a radically different approach if it's done collaboratively with the business. So once we did this, the first thing we did was, well, now we know that the problem that business is having is with that old version of the platform. So we picked up the phone and we gave the vendor a call. They were actually thrilled that we were doing this because they were tired of maintaining that 6-year-old version. They did not have the people or the means to support it. So what they offered to do was to host a newer version of the platform and at a fraction of the cost, and they allow the project team to deliver just that API interface for the new device that we were launching. So a plan for which it was going to take a whole year to deliver this new device, we did it within about 3.5 months, and we got the ability to support new media players on this device as well as better encoding. And the API cost a fraction of the original cost. And I rolled off the project before this got completed, but there were plans at that point to move the first device onto the API interface, beef it up a bit, and then, if possible, move the online store, but they were still discussing whether they wanted to even support the online store anymore. So this gave the start of communication between the business and IT, and also helped address what the real problem was. Another 2 key findings that I actually wanted to highlight from this case study was we used a co-source team. It's really important to co-source your team with product owners who lived with the legacy application as well as technologists who lived with the legacy application. That helps give a lot of context to the people who don't know the domain and don't know the pain points and constraints of the legacy platform. So that's very important to do. And the other one is to pick a culturally aligned vendor. Picking a supplier can either constrain or help flourish the business. In this case, the video management platform vendor had gone Agile about a year ago, and they were delivering things in 2-week sprints, which made it really easy and fast to get some of those business challenges addressed. So that was one of the findings that came out of this. And yeah, so this project took about 3.5 months, and this is the case study that I
So coming back to these three words again, we've been able to take a look at has worked. And what I'd like to leave you with is these three terms here. So thin slicing will describe how that discipline and rigor can actually get you to ensure that you're not that the coupling of logic that could exist, and how to actually analyze that and make sure that you can build out a platform that grows and can scale. So you can spend your money on those things as opposed to your big ball of logic. Separation, and inherently how the technical separation and business separation could mirror each other, thereby allowing you to look at your technology assets as business assets instead of as different assets. And degradation is something to keep in mind so that you're not spending money all the time trying to replace or work on one big aspect of your business. You have now your business separation, which allows you to focus your money and spend on things that might be degrading faster than other things. Oftentimes we find where the legacy platform itself is considered as one big asset and it's degrading in some aspects, and therefore the whole thing needs to be replaced. So circling back to where we started, back to basics, in the very, very simple words, these three things are the main considerations that we're going to ask you to keep in your minds when you walk in and you start looking at your legacy assets and whether you're actually going to make the decision to transform them or not. We're coming on 50 minutes, and keeping in mind that we're the second presentation this morning and it's right before lunch, we wanted to make sure that we had everybody's attention. Thanks a lot for listening, and we wanted to make sure that we spend enough time answering and addressing questions, and we've kind of tailored our presentation accordingly. So thanks for being here, and if you have any more information, we have some business cards here. This is us. Feel free to contact us at any time.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
When do you decide that it has to be replaced in an application rather than transform gears or replacing it's so bad, do you think anything can be salvaged?
So
Sorry,
that's what
please
I was
repeat
saying.
the question.
Sorry?
Repeat the question.
Repeat the question.
Please.
So the question was, how do you decide whether to replace your legacy app? How do you make that decision? Because things seem so bad, you don't know if there are things you can salvage. And that comes back to degradation. That's an assessment that you need to make. Are all the parts of the system degrading at the same rate? Also, there may be some really poor pieces that you can salvage. What I found really useful is to do a current process mapping with the business and highlight what the business challenges are with that system. So you can put sticky notes on it saying, I can't accept credit cards, I can't do this with the system. And then, this is a technique I've used in the past, then draw up the current architecture and see where those business problems are stemming from. Oh, well, we have this part of the system that we just cannot accept credit cards at this point. We have more encryption. And so that helps you sort of change what parts of the system are really throttling your business. If you get that picture, then it becomes a little bit easier to visualize and analyze where your legacy system is really hurting you. And I know from a technologist point of view, you can't maintain the system anymore, but there are steps you can take in between to actually start changing the system, transforming it. And when you reach a point, you can choose to completely replace it. You've changed enough parts of that system. You can completely do an overhaul at that point. But the important part is to actually take steps towards that direction. And then if replacement is the final outcome, then that's what it is. But if you go in with the mindset of saying, well, we just have to replace it, sometimes it can be paralyzing. Where to start?
No, there's some precisely right.
A practical question. So when transforming the legacy system to Agile, in order to avoid the impact of old system or user experience, how do you, or what approach for testing aspect, how do you guarantee that new introduced module or interface won't break existing one? So what testing strategy you applied in this area, during this period?
Technical you take.
So we've used very behavior-driven tests. So those are the most important things that you need to put in place first. So I did this one in Australia for an insurance company. They had this large mainframe system that, they, parts of it, like I said, they wanted to move into a web application. So we try to understand what the necessary behavior of that system needed to be. So you have to sit with your business analysts, your quality analysts who are doing this day in and day out and say, okay, what are the most important scenarios that should not break or that we need to mimic in that new system? So then you can articulate what kind of tests to build, and then you build tests with more of a behavior strategy, saying when I put this sort of an order into the system, this is sort of what I want to expect, and then you can use that to replicate it in your new system as well.
Yeah, just to put a slightly finer point on it, we went to an engagement. Similar question came up. So we asked the basic question: what's the behavior that exists right now? And then the people actually explained the behavior to us, and it was great. It was wonderful. They actually knew the legacy platform really, really well. They knew the behavior. We looked at the test suite, and it didn't reflect that. So what we were trying to explain was, you guys have the knowledge. Reflect that in your tests. Build those tests for your old system. Make sure that they actually capture all the behavior. Then that's the strategy you use for your new system. You don't have to change it, you don't have to add to it. But you can just, as long as you have documented, and I mean not written paper documents, but I mean actual test suites that tell you what the behavior is, that is the simplest thing that you can do to make your execution easy on the target system.
And I think that is probably what I thought as well. But when we apply or when we do the regression for whole system, main feature, for example, so that implies to me it's a huge test set. So, but when we develop a new module interface, it's a very thin planning. But that huge testing, how can I just apply into the very thin development? It's very hard because it requires lots of testing within that short period of time.
Right, I think I understand that your overall system is still a combination of the new pieces that you're teasing out and the old things. There's still one box, there's still one system. You're strangling the older box and putting it out into another different box. But as far as your test suite and your functionality and your customer experience and your overall behavior, they're exactly the same. So that big test suite still applies. It applies to the overall set with these two pieces as opposed to just one piece. It's still the same test suite.
Yeah, I understand that, but my concern was because you build up a new team to do that interface, and also that should include tested and deliverable. But that is a resource required to do the testing. So when you plan that a small sprint to do the work, how much test effort you want to put in?
Sure.
That is
there's a lot of questions that came up in there in terms of the team, how the team is going to be divided, how the work is going to be done, and the actual execution of those slices. Slightly more tactical. We can have a conversation after this and go into some of the more specific details of what you're asking. Any other questions?
So when you say same slice, is that sort of componentized your application out? Or I just don't see, sometimes you cannot get a slice out. You probably have to get some functionality.
So the question, that would be the question. The question is, it's often hard to identify how those slices should be defined and whether those slices should be actual pieces of behavior or components. Is that the question? Did I get a fair idea of the question? Sure. So a couple of things that Michelle mentioned before. There's an entire exercise and a whole different presentation that could be made for how to pick your slices. We wanted to not go too much into the how of how to do that, but we do have a short answer. It's very natural and very normal to look at your application as feature buckets. And to go back to the slide that we saw before, we had things like API, user experience, data, and performance, and as very different large functional areas. Not feature areas, functional areas. So what that does is, when we do slice one, we have to take the minimum amount of performance aspects into consideration and play those stories now. The problem that we want to avoid is, I want to see the good, nice, shiny looking features now, deal with performance and hosting later. And we want to get out of that habit. So how we go about developing those thin slices involves every single bucket, what is the least I can do to get to production. Again, like I mentioned in the success story, they don't have to be visual, they don't have to be features, they don't have to be actual business deliverables. They're very thin slices that go about in matters of days or weeks, not weeks and months.
Yeah, the important thing is to get started and get that sort of momentum going. And if you take out big chunks of features and try to replace that in your first release, it can be very, very overwhelming. So the important thing is to keep, build your delivery mindset in place, get into a little bit of a rhythm, and then, then start delivering. So this is, again, we're talking, a couple of weeks. So businesses are comfortable waiting for, okay, when can I see my next set of features? Okay, coming in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's not uncommon to say, yeah, all that stuff I thought I wanted in release one, I don't really want it anymore. I don't need it. Go. So that tends to happen naturally as you progress through the slices.
And it helps with team confidence as well. So, just doing something small, taking a small bite, it takes time for teams to gel, it takes time for teams to get into a rhythm, and if you try to take off big bites, then that affects morale as well. So small pieces, something that gets you into a rhythm, and then once that sort of builds up and you get momentum, then you can start taking bigger bites of the apple, and you'll feel like that won't be as hard.
Not only that, but a big bite to scare the hell out of your customer.
Yeah, big change,
Yes.
not so great visual.
Even though they want it.
Even though
It's
they
yeah.
want it. Anybody else?
Okay, well, just from my side, I don't nearly have as much experience as they have. I have, however, seen this in practice and experienced it enough to know it works. It really works. And for me personally, the most important point is what they started with and ended with, and that's what makes it so great, is just take that first step. So please seek them out, have a conversation with them. Amit and Michelle, thank you very much for your time. Oh, sorry.